The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Well, greetings and welcome into my state of mind on this Tuesday evening as we move through phase one. Such a pleasure to have you, and we're going to Zoom for the foreseeable future until some of the social distancing issues have been relaxed. And I will tell you, it's a whole new ballgame. Whether it comes to your business or mine, well, one way or the other, we'll figure it all out, find a new kind of normal, and improve on it as we go. And we're hoping to improve on the television shows as well. Timing, just want to let you know, still in effect for day behind. So we're recording this show on Monday afternoon for Tuesday night. It might be soon that we're actually on a same day basis again. So hang in there with us. Tonight's show is a discussion with Judge Robert Flanders, former Supreme Court Justice. He has penned off a really interesting essay about the power that the governor has and what she may be stepping past, and whether the statutes and the Constitution actually curb or prohibit the current emergency authority that the governor is exercising. And don't forget, in lieu of the General Assembly, which has been, for the most part, other than a meeting or two, dormant on these matters. So stay tuned. When we come back, Judge Robert Flanders on this very intricate constitutional question. Stay with us. Into my state of mind, I am really pleased and honored to have the former Supreme Court Justice Robert Flanders with me here this afternoon. I want to talk to the judge about the concepts of government, where the court system plays, his recent essay on potential litigation that could come from any number of parties regarding the governor's emergency power, and a whole bunch of other things. Again, that this conversation that Judge Flanders and I are going to have is recorded on Monday afternoon, prelim to the Narragansett Town Council's resolution that they will debate on Monday night. So you may have already seen that news, but it's one of many, I think, symptoms of the problem or results of some of the problems that will pop up from time to time. He's not here primarily to talk about Narragansett. He's here primarily to talk about the entire picture. And, with no further ado, I just want to bring Justice Flanders on. Judge, good to see you. And I know that you're not unfamiliar with COVID-19, are you?
No, unfortunately, my wife and I had the personal experience of having the virus, but the good news is that it was a relatively mild case, and we were recently declared to be negative on testing. So, and that's true apparently for most of us, Dan, who do get this. Fortunately, it's only a minority of people that suffer severe symptoms and obviously risk death even in very tough cases. But so the good news is that we're healthy again and happy to be back in circulation and working.
You and I'm so happy for that. You recently wrote a very provocative piece. I learned of it from the Center for Freedom and Prosperity. But tell me, I know you affiliate with those folks in terms of some common thought process, but you have your own think tank process. Before we start labeling and branding where you platform your views, you talk to me about what you've been doing lately with that kind of thing.
All right, so I'm a lawyer in private practice now, have a member of a firm doing business litigation principally, but also I'm on the board of that Freedom and Prosperity Center that Mike Stenhouse heads up, and I'm a board member of things like College Unbound and a number of other nonprofits that are in our community. So I'm very active both on nonprofit boards, other for-profit boards, and in my private law practice.
The politics out of your system yet? I mean, you made a run for Senate. I've always said, I wish you'd chosen the gubernatorial route. All due respect to Gina Raimondo, I think that your command of the issues and your ability to manage, for instance, in Central Falls and the receivership situation there, would have been up that alley. A, is the politics out of you? And B, do you ever think about having taken the other turn?
Sometimes, but I don't envy Governor Raimondo. She's in a tough spot in the sense that she's got to make some tough decisions, and I'm not challenging her credibility or her good faith, but in the piece that I published, I do think that she's potentially overstepping some of the limits that the General Assembly placed on her, not to mention the constitutional limits that restrict any governor's actions. But I'm fully concentrating now, Dan, on what I'm doing and not giving much thought to future political stuff.
Okay, so I'm gonna then just pick your brain, not based on, because everybody, in America, but certainly here in Rhode Island, always wonders, hey, what's the play here? I've always thought that your thinking process and your availability to help us think through things has been, pure of heart, pure of intellect, and let's keep it on that level. I think there are a couple things that you and I might do a little battle on here, the friendly battle like we did on the radio the other day, just in terms of point counterpoint. But to set up for this segment, and then we'll dive in next segment, explain to me what you're concerned about. We'll get into the gubernatorial / General Assembly stuff next segment, but in general, you're concerned about what?
Well, the big worry is that is the economy. I think we can find a middle way to get back to both opening up businesses and being safe. But my biggest worry is that we're driving many people into insolvency and even worse, domestic abuse, suicides, things that happen when people can't make a living. And so I'm particularly concerned about the fact that it's impacting our poorer members of society even more than anybody else. They're the ones who are taking the big hit, the hourly workers, people of color. 40% of that population is now unemployed, which is an incredible number. If you're making less than $40,000, 40% of those people are unemployed. So I think that we need to pay attention to that, and at the same time practice social distancing in a reasonable way, but let's not do too many shutdowns, which is what's happening now.
So let me just address what might be for some the elephant in the room. It's like, oh yeah, Judge, you beat it. That's fine. Now you want us to all throw ourselves back in. I mean, it almost feels like people who, we all want to. I think if there's immunity, we don't really know. But if there is, everybody wants to kind of like get through that, through that funnel, just be able to get through the eye of the needle and be able to be past this and get back into the game. Resolve that for anybody whose mind might be wandering there.
Well, as I've said in the piece that I published the other day, there's no pandemic exception to our constitutional rights. People have a right to assemble, to worship, to make a living, to be compensated when their property is taken for public use by just compensation. These things aren't happening now. And so, yes, we have to be careful and we have to do social distancing, but it's not an either or proposition. And so my concern is that, and the other concern, of course, is the political one, in the sense that we have one person, the governor, acting unilaterally without the normal checks and balances that we need to have a democratic government.
All right, so when we come back, we're going to talk about that very thing. We are talking with Justice Flanders about his thoughts on the process when we return. Stay with us. Justice Robert Flanders, former Supreme Court judge, now in private practice, a lot of experience in municipal finance, of course, and his receivership work in Central Falls is well known and understood, and his run for the Senate, he was a voice for I think a lot of things logic, but politics out of the picture, but looking at the system at the same time. Your concerns about the actual statutory constitutional limits that the governor is now bumping up against or has broken through. Tell me what the actual acute legal argument would be to say, you know what, enough for this emergency status and unilateral decision making.
Yeah. So the statute that empowers the governor with these extraordinary abilities to shut down businesses and the like is called the Emergency Management Act, but it only gives her a 30-day window to declare emergencies, and yet We all know that some of these orders that have issued and other things that have come out of the governor's office are shutting down businesses into the summer. They moved the primary from April 28th to June 2nd. The people need to know that the legislation that gives her these extraordinary powers has a 30-day limit on it. And while she's able to renew that, the whole point of it is to take this in very small chunks, and yet we're getting pronouncements that extend out for months. Secondly, the legislation gives the General Assembly a role to check this by giving them, by a concurrent resolution, the power to end any emergency declaration, and of course by individual legislation to override anything the governor may have done that may have crossed the line either constitutionally or practically. So we've got these limits here, and unfortunately, in some cases, that's not being respected, and the General Assembly has gone to sleep because they're not meeting and they're not checking anything.
Right. I mean, the General Assembly's sleepiness here, I mean, I think we're both being kind. They're comatose. And it's fascinating to see what the vacuum has created here. This governor, I think, has had her longtime battle to the General Assembly and also has always been, certainly behind the scenes, fighting for legitimacy. You know, we're always touting in Rhode Island that this is the weakest form of governorship in America. And whether it is or it isn't, it certainly is understood that the Speaker of the House is the most powerful position in the state and all of that. And so now we get into this COVID emergency situation. The Speaker and the Senate President, for their own different reasons, I think, have kind of stepped down and let Gina fill the vacuum. And to her credit, I think you would agree that she's done a really good job on the hospital stuff and the medical stuff and the acute early weeks of this and trying to get under the curve and knock it off and all that kind of a thing. But she is going to own this, Judge. She's going to own this as long as they allow her to own this. And they have shown no signs of holding her back and bringing that General Assembly in, masks and all, separation and all, different forum, maybe the Vets Auditorium or PPAC and all. None. It's horrifying in a way, don't you think?
Yeah, no, it is because of the fact that so much of this is hurting so many people. Property is being taken without just compensation. Businesses are being shuttered. And as I indicated earlier, our least advantaged citizens are perhaps feeling the brunt of this more than anybody. Not all of us can work from home like you and I. Unfortunately, a lot of hourly workers and people making less than $40,000, of whom apparently 40% are now unemployed, they're the ones who are suffering the most. And unfortunately, by overreaching in some instances, the governor is not duly sensitive to these folks. Yes, we all want to be safe, but we can practice social distancing. Why is it, for example, that only 5 people can assemble at a church, whereas 10 can be at a funeral? And in other venues, those restrictions don't apply. What's essential? What is not essential? The governor is making these determinations unilaterally without any input from our elected representatives, and that's concerning.
I want to talk in the next segment here, our final segment. I want to talk to you, Judge, about the nuances that need to be applied, the managerial nuances that need to be applied, either by the governor, who's very rigid in the way she thinks, or by the General Assembly, which should be meeting and checking on these nuances. Right back with Judge Flanders. Don't go anywhere. Judge Robert Flanders here on Dan Yorke's State of Mind. Your Honor, I think that one of the things that really is crazy about the situation is that we are going to start to see folks peeling away from abiding by the directives. The Narragansett Town Council last night had a vote. Again, we're recording this Monday afternoon. You're seeing it Tuesday night. The chances are that it went down, but just the very idea that some politician thought or elected official thought it was wise to put a resolution that more or less said, you know what, Governor, we're all done with you. We're going to open everything up. While a lot of the constituents are saying we're not quite ready yet to jam the bars, but the point is that is an indicator of the frustration or the opportunists taking advantage of the frustration. there has to be a lot more nuance. Look at the Kentucky Country Club situation. I mean, you got guys playing 15 holes. They're members at a Rhode Island club. They live in Seekonk, a quarter mile from the door. The rigidity of the governor's thinking process, her lack of delegation to a business czar, and the General Assembly's vacancy have caused all this, right?
As the weather gets nicer, Dan, there's going to be more and more pressure from other groups besides the Narragansett Town Council. Everyone is getting restive because it's been difficult for all of us economically, spiritually, and otherwise to be isolated. And what's frustrating is we know that there's a middle way here. There's a way you can respect social distancing, wear masks, be apart from one another, yet also be together in some context. So rather than an either-or situation, I think people are pushing, let us at least open. Let us at least make a chance at making a living. That's what more and more people are going to start crying out, particularly as the weather gets nicer, and particularly as the curve continues to flatten, which it is. And we're seeing this in other states already. So I think that trend is going to continue.
All right. So, we hope the flattening continues. The whole argument is, wait a second, we got to flatten curve because we've shut everything down. And she knows it's all about, she wants to go slow, go slow, go slow. Specifically, do you have an idea, without having, the responsibility for a certain category of business or industry, an example of what you want to see go faster right now, in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3?
Well, let's start with the constitutional stuff. I think what should go faster is to relax the rules on only 5 people can congregate in a church. I mean, if churches can separate people adequately, why should they be limited to 5 people? And you saw that with Bishop Tobin the other day, making a pitch to do that. So clearly, but also small businesses, haircutters, and the like. You can practice social distancing, limit the number of people that come in, and deal with this issue that way rather than completely shutting them down. So, yeah, those are just a couple of examples. Restaurants, yeah, okay, it's great we can be outside, but when it starts to rain, then there ought to be some way to accommodate people inside as long as you have social distancing. Give these folks a chance to make a living, albeit one that's reduced, rather than completely shutting them down.
All right, I only have a minute and a half or so here, but tell me what you think the results are and what success would occur from any kind of litigation by a party who has been afflicted by this.
Yeah, well, certainly the constitutional angles, the religious part of it, that's already been successful in one or more other states. But I think you're going to see claims for takings, regulatory takings of property without just compensation. After all, this has been a recognized right of action in the courts already in other contexts. If they take your land for a post office or a school, they've got to pay you. Well, if they take it by regulation or by constructively taking it through regulations, shouldn't the government pay some compensation to these folks? So I think you're going to see challenges along those lines as well.
All right, listen, Your Honor, thank you very much. We'll follow this and continue to stay in touch with you. Glad you're well, and we'll see how this whole thing goes. The next week or two are going to be crucial. Really appreciate your thought process, Judge.
Thank you, Dan. Have a great day.
Robert Flanders, former Supreme Court Justice. I want to thank Robert Flanders, former Supreme Court Justice, for that interesting conversation. Look, there's a lot of pressure right now being applied by those who think we need to open and open now. And as kind of a postscript and an epilogue, this particular segment you're watching now is actually being recorded on Tuesday afternoon for tonight, and a reflection on that which we had talked about, and that is the Narragansett Town Council's resolution proposed last night. Matthew Mannix, the council president who introduced the resolution, that more or less thumbed its nose at the governor's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 scenario by saying that all businesses should be open in Narragansett somewhat immediately. He withdrew that resolution. I had mentioned on our interview segments here And I mentioned now that the council had been counted, at least 3 of the votes, 2 on my program and 1 on my pal Matt Allen's program on WPRO. And what was interesting about those 3 counselors is that they were saying right off the bat that this is way too much, because they were getting a pulse from the community in terms of how much it was willing to risk. I find it fascinating that the gap that we were talking about with Judge Flanders and the General Assembly's lack of filling that gap has really caused a lot of consternation and a lot of misunderstanding. And it's also showing a lot about how too many constituents just don't know enough about government. The resolution would have been an opinion. The resolution had not yet even found its way to securing a directive over the police chief, who was saying, look, I'm not going to break any laws. The state police were ready to come into Narragansett and enforce the laws, not as some kind of a beatdown, but to make sure that there's some consistency between the governor's office all the way down to the ground. The difficulty remains that the governor remains rigid on her phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and there is no equitable form of government to put the pressure on her. Without the General Assembly taking hearings on things like the idea of the council president in Narragansett and forming some special legislation that would, minimize the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, to provide some kind of debate and counterpoint to the governor. Without that, we're going to have this kind of spit up of not mutiny, but minor version of anarchy, and we can't afford that. Especially when police officers, really in their guts, don't want to be enforcing these kinds of rules because they see on the ground how little sense it makes to many, including them. Anyway, it's a tough road that we're hoeing right here with a government that is really one person at this point, calling all of the shots. So we'll continue to keep pace on this and bring you the latest. Coming up on the Wednesday program, we will talk to salons, hairstylists, who seem to be completely lost in terms of what is phase 1, what is phase 2, and what is phase 3 for them. They're struggling right now. Don't forget to tune in to WPRO weekdays 3 till 6, and we'll be back here tomorrow night with another program. So glad you tuned in. Thanks. Good night.